There we go. Okay. Now this is really kind of strange because there are people out there that are just mean. I mean, it sounds mean, but it's a cultural imperative. So in select places, this antisocial punishment is very common. So despite the fact that Jeff hasn't done anything, potentially Michelle's going to punish him for just being Jeff, I guess. I don't know.
It does happen.
There is no reason for you to be mean to him, but you'll do it anyway.
I'm not mean to him.
Well, I know I'm saying this in general. It happens.
I can reverse the situation.
Yeah.
So Jeff can be just mean to you for no reason whatsoever. It's almost like he's punishing you for something that you did, but you didn't do anything. So it's just plain meanness, and they call this antisocial punishment. And it just came out of this strange game that they were playing. And when they played this game around the world, they discovered that the place where they saw it the most, this antisocial punishment, was in Oman, which is, of course, on the Arabian Peninsula. That's where Saudi Arabia is. That's where Yemen is. That's where Oman is, one of those countries. They also found it in Greece. So if you watch My Big Fat Greek Wedding, or whatever, I mean anything that's really about people from Greece, sometimes there's just something negative going on. And there is no explanation for it. It doesn't register with people who aren't Greek. They don't understand it. This whole thing about the evil eye. Evil eye is huge in Greece, in the Adriatic, in that whole area. It's huge. So what is the evil eye? It's when somebody curses somebody for no reason whatsoever. And this is big in Greece.
It's kind of like they're not native there.
Yes. So it's big in Greece. It's also big in Saudi Arabia. Now remember, this is part of the Arabian Peninsula once again. These are individuals that were nomads. These are Arabs. So why in the world would they be mean to people? Well, it's just part of the culture. Saudi Arabia.
Is that the one you're talking about? How if they're not mean, they can't negotiate or something? Is that the same people? Okay.
Right. Guess who's number 4? Russia is number 4.
Go Russia.
Just mean to be mean. No reason for it. No explanation for it. This whole evil eye thing. The Russians have this. Really kind of strange. The notion that punishment promotes cooperation holds true.
Oh, I thought it looked like blood. I'm like, oh,
That cooperation holds true only in societies characterized by norms for civic cooperation and high levels of trust. That's not a sentence. I'm sorry. I don't know what it was supposed to say. Antisocial punishment was entirely unexpected by the researchers who first discovered it, but it appears to be quite commonplace in many cultures, and it remains somewhat puzzling to people. Why? Why in the world would you just do something mean to somebody? One time we were jogging. It was in physical education. We were jogging, and I ran past this kid, and he took a pencil and he jammed it into my thigh. Broke off. I still had the head of the pencil in my thigh. He wasn't a friend of mine, but he wasn't an enemy of mine either. I didn't really interact with this kid.
Maybe they didn't like the way you were, and then just it that way.
I was the shortest one in the class. Was there something wrong with me, or was I just the guy that ran past when he felt like sticking out his pencil? I don't know. I don't know what the problem was, but I've got a pencil lead in my thigh now.
Can you get it removed, or is it?
I'm sorry?
Are you gonna get it? Well,
There's no reason.
no reason to. Okay.
I got
Good thing I
muscle
forgot.
now. It didn't slow me down. I was a nationally ranked sprinter when I was in college. So obviously it didn't do me any harm. But he just did it for no reason whatsoever. I hardly even knew this kid. He had other friends. Did somebody else tell him to do it? I don't know. I have no idea. But he just did it.
stages of game.
The researchers' data show that societies with weaker norms for civic cooperation and weaker rules of law engaged in more antisocial punishment and public goods games. So the weaker the society, the more likely that this would take place. People would just do mean things for no reason whatsoever. Why are some people in the United States so against welfare? What is wrong with welfare? Why is it so horrible? Would we rather watch these people starve to death? Would you rather watch these people starve to death, Jeff?
No.
Death, Jeff? Not easy.
Well, some people think that, well, I know I've seen both sides. I've heard it in different classes where they see it as it's just giving out of services.
Sure.
As well as other people see it as more as helpful for them with what they have and trying to get better, but it's hard to find what to improve, I guess.
I've got this big pile of food. Okay? I've got all the money in the world. I got $20. I have $25 and some singles. I probably have $30 here. Now, if you need money and I've got $30, or if you need food and I've got $30, what's wrong with me feeding you? Is it okay if I feed you? I'll buy you a Coke. You've already got it.
I see what you mean.
I don't know. It just, okay. Right. So what's the alternative? Well, make them get a job. Well, there aren't any jobs.
And if they find them, then they say it's not good enough to keep. They might lose their benefits because it gets too much or something like that.
Well, let's not get strange, okay?
Okay. Sorry. Okay.
This person's going to starve to death if we don't feed them.
Okay.
So what do? Do you feed them or do you not feed them? Well, some people don't want to feed them. They don't care. Even though, so are we taking food out of your mouth in order to feed these other people?
Not necessarily.
No, you still have the same amount of food you had before. I know. Kind of weird, isn't it? So let's not feed these people. Let's just let them starve to death. Okay, it gets worse. In dealing with a system that can't always be trusted to function, people come up with alternative ways to ensure that their needs are met. I had a crappy chair, and it's sitting right over there. It was in my office, and it's just a piece of crap. But there were two really nice chairs sitting over there. I don't know if you remember the two nice chairs sitting over there. I did. I'm standing up here lecturing, and I'm ogling the chairs in the back of the room. So I realized that 600 upstairs needs a chair. So I took one of the chairs upstairs, and I traded my crappy chair for the nicest chair. Now it's in my office. So instead of that chair just sitting over there with nobody sitting in it, I've got it down in my office now, and my crappy chair is sitting right over there. Actually, there's a degree of comfort to that chair that I miss, but that's okay. What's my point? Okay, so we're in a system where how in the world do I get a nice chair? What do I have to do to get a nice chair at Dene College? What do I have to do? Who do I have to talk to?
Just borrow in place.
I've been doing this all my life, okay? I don't know who to talk to, okay? But I got a crappy chair, so I just came down and I took it. I took the chair. I've stolen a chair. Not just one, but two. There's one up on the 6th floor. It's supposed to be sitting right over there in the corner. Somebody is missing a chair. Somebody's going to get in trouble. No, probably not. But the whole point is, this is a system that doesn't work, obviously, because I don't have the chair that I want. So what's happening? In Brazil, there is a complex sociocultural strategy termed jitembo, by which people manipulate or dodge the official rules to achieve things. And we do it all the time. We do it every time we get in the car and drive faster than the speed limit. We're dodging the rules. We're stretching the rules. How fast can you drive on the reservation? What's the speed limit? 55. It's 55, Jeff. How fast do you drive on the reservation?
Depends on where I'm at.
Okay, you're between here and Chin-Lee.
I don't really go that fast going into
55? You go 55?
Maybe
You're such
60.
a good person. You're like everybody's grandmother. Everybody's passing you.
I don't mind.
Michelle, how fast do you go?
Really fast.
Really fast?
Well, not on these roads because I'm barely still learning them.
Okay.
But when I'm home, I should go like 80. But I'm always in a rush and I'm always running late. So
Okay.
70.
70, 70,
Average.
80, between here and Chin-Lee. I go 65.
But if it's going back to Phoenix, I usually drive really fast.
that's like 100.
100? Your car goes that fast? Wow, I'm impressed. My car goes faster than that, but that's not important. I still drive 5 miles, because people like to stop little red cars. They really like to stop, cops like to stop little red cars. So this is what happened the other day. I was driving to Chin-Lee, and the police had stopped somebody right outside the school, you know, where the big sign is, going to Chin-Lee. Right there, they had stopped somebody. So I got behind a couple people, and I'm thinking, well, you know, we're headed to Chin-Lee. It's 50, 55 miles per hour. I mean, it wasn't just me, it wasn't just them, it was a whole line of people. They were all going 50, 55 miles an hour, because they just seen the cop.
The Navajo police?
Yeah, Navajo police, sure. These are all, I don't know if they were all Navajos, I assume they were. Not all the white people from the school were driving to Chin-Lee that night, all those old farts. There's an awful lot of old people here. I'm not the oldest one. Maybe I am the oldest one. But I have a sports car, by God, and that thing will go 140 miles an hour. The speedometer goes up to 150, but I've only had it up to 140. Not for an extended length of time. I'm too spooked by policemen. Anyway. A real-life example of these weaker norms for civic cooperation can be seen in the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? You guys know the show? Used to have Regis Philbin on it. He's retired now. I don't know if it's even on television anymore. Actually, it started in England. It was a show from England, and of course it came to the United States, but it went all over the world. So there were forms of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire all over the world. Contestants are able to use a lifeline they can poll the studio audience for help in answering a difficult question. You remember that in the show, if you've ever watched the show. So if they don't know an answer, they can ask the audience. And what does the audience do?
Usually they help them.
Yeah, they'll give them the right answer, right? Because they want to see them win $1 million. They want to see them do whatever they can do. That's the way it works. That's the way it works in the UK. That's the way it works in the United States. However, they have the same game in Russia. When Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was introduced in Russia, the contestants quickly found out that they couldn't trust the audience. Frequently, the audience members would deliberately choose the wrong answer in an apparent effort to mislead the contestants. Antisocial punishment. Why? Why would they want to see them fail? Schadenfreude is that they like to see people fail. It makes them feel better. Well, this potentially has to do with why they would mess with our elections. Why would they care?
They want to see the U.S. fail.
I'm sorry?
Maybe they want to see the U.S. fail
Sure.
in different ways.
Would we mess with their elections? It's against the law. If an American was found messing with somebody with a foreign election, oh my God. CIA does it, but that's a different story. That's with enemy nations. Not unlike the public goods game, many members of the Russian audience seem to be more motivated to sabotage the play of the contestants than to help them. As bizarre as that seems. So they just want to see things not work. And this is one of the reasons, if you've never been to Russia. I've never been to Russia either. But there's a lot of things that don't work in Russia. And there's a reason that why they don't get fixed. Because they want to see things not work. It's part of their culture. This broken stuff. Now remember, you don't know. you don't know the history of Russia. If you knew the history of Russia, you'd understand that they were under czars until 1917. The czars had absolute power over everybody. And the czars gave power to the church. So there was a whole lot of people in charge. There were very few people in charge, and there were a whole lot of people that were being completely controlled, but by not only the government, but also by the church. So we've got this whole population of people that want to see things not work, because then they can complain about it. As the Brathman brothers have said, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russians became suspicious of those who were trying to profit off the hard work of others. And for that reason, of course, they want to see things fail. As strange and confusing as that is. And that may have something to do with why they colluded in the United States, with the United States election. Now, only in the Soviet Union would you have a band called Pussy Riot. It's a group of females, rockers, and they keep getting arrested because of the obscenity of the name, I guess. But they also protest against the government. And this lady is actually in jail right now. She's she's the lead singer. I don't know if you've ever seen the group or if you have any idea who these people are. They go on stage. They're obviously female, but they wear ski masks, so nobody can see who they are, so they can't be arrested. But this is one of the individuals. One of them has immigrated to the United States to get away from the Soviet government. Putin hates these ladies. And of course, they're not going to have that name in the United States. They wouldn't put up with it. Norms of civic cooperation remain relatively low in Russia and many other societies around the world, which makes it more difficult for governments to band citizens together in cooperative ventures. And of course, that's one of the biggest problems they have in the Soviet Union. And that is the end of whatever that chapter is. Pussy Riot, Pussy. I know, every time you have to say it, you go, should I say it or should I not? Oh my God! How can I say this without getting fired? I know. I hope nobody was offended. It's not my band, okay? Their music is actually not that good, but it's not that good. Then again, I don't like most modern music. So. Okay, let's talk about physical health. Culture and physical health. What does culture have to do with physical health? Well, let's figure it out. Genetic variability in humans is considerably less than in many other species, given how recently modern humans emerged as a species. So if we look at dogs, I've got a neighbor. She's got a dog, and it's smaller than a rat. And this dog will chase my dogs. My dogs weigh about 65 pounds apiece. And she'll chase those little guys, those big guys, and they're scared to death of this little rat dog. Sub-rat dog. She's just a tiny little thing. She's got huge ears. Oddest thing in the world. Dogs, of course, have been around for a really, really long time, and they come from several different types of canines. There are wolves, there are foxes, they're both canines. And potentially domesticated dogs came from both of those places. I have no idea where this little rat dog came from. No idea whatsoever.
Is it a rat terrier?
If you like...
The Chihuahua.
Sorry?
Chihuahua?
Yeah, it's not a Chihuahua.
A rat terrier?
It looks like a dachshund.
Oh.
But it's got these huge ears that stick straight up like a rabbit. I mean, it's fat. I think she's pregnant. And that may be why she's so grouchy with other animals. I'm scared to death I'm going to run over. Because you can't see her. I mean, she's only this big. And they let her outside to just run around. I'm
Is
scared
that
to death.
short or long hair?
Short. She looks just like a Doberman Pinscher with short legs. Is what she looks like, except her ears are so big.
Aww.
Ugliest dog you ever saw. Ugliest dog I ever saw. Okay, you guys made it think she's cute. There's nothing cute about this dog. Nothing cute, as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure they're just madly in love with her. Belle is her name. She chases my dogs, and my dogs they don't know what to do. because she's so tiny and she's so adamant. Modern humans first emerged approximately 200,000 years ago, and they all lived in Africa until approximately 50 to 60,000 years ago, when some of them migrated elsewhere. If this doesn't fit with your idea of where humans came from, don't feel bad. There are a lot of people that don't agree with this. This is the scientific idea of where all humans came from. So that's okay. You can think anything you like. Humans, but it's weird. It's weird. We can map people by the food that they ate. We can map people by the allergies that they have. We can follow people around. One of the things that American Indians are kind of pissed off about, as far as Europeans are concerned, is that we keep trying to tell you where you started out. Oh, you're Athabascan, so you guys started out. You're one of the last groups to come across the Bering Land Bridge. That's what we tell Athabascans. Why? Well, that's because there's Athabascans living in Alaska. And they have spread all the way down the coast, and they're also here. But there's one group out in North Carolina, Athabascan-speaking people. I know, it's kind of bizarre. So there's one group there, but everybody else is over here on the west coast. So the assumption is that you were one of the last groups to come across the Bering Land Bridge. A theory. So we're tracking people. So the Algonquian people, the Grovan, those people that speak Algonquian. Well, where are most of the people that speak Algonquian? Well, they were on the East Coast, up in Canada and down into New York, Maine. All of those are Algonquian-speaking people. So here, all of a sudden, we've got the Grovan over here, way over here in Montana. So where did they originate? Well, the idea is they originated where most of the people speak that language. So they originated on the East Coast and they migrated west, and that's where the Grovan came from. But the Grovan are the only ones. The Blackfeet are also an Algonquian-speaking tribe, and so are the Cheyenne, and so are the Arapaho. Who else? I don't know. Anyway, so the assumption is that since the major language group is over here, that they migrated west, and that's where they ended up. So they started here and came this way, and you guys started here and came this way. So where did the Algonquians start? Well, they were one of the first groups. That was one of the ideas.
Is Algonquian also Dakota and Lakota language?
No, that's Sioux.
Okay, I was just curious.
You bastard! How could you say that? My God!
I was just curious.
No, they're Sioux. It's a Siouan language. I know. Now, here's one of the most bizarre things about the Siouan language. So the Sioux were this relatively powerful Lakota, Nakota, Dakota thing. Okay, so you got all these Siouan-speaking people, and they go all the way down into Nebraska and Iowa. The Fox are Siouan-speaking people. The Winnebago or the Ho-Chunk. Okay, and they were up in Wisconsin. So you've got the Crow, and the Crow are like everybody's enemy, but especially the Sioux. The Sioux hate the Crow. But the Crow speak, guess what? A Siouan language. It's so bizarre, I know. I know, it's a lot of fun. We just kind of follow these people around, try to figure out what the hell's going on. Anyway, okay, so we can talk about languages, but we can also look at food allergies that people have. We can look at a lot of different things. We could look at now that we have done the genome. We can look at people's genes, but of course, people don't like that. They don't want you to do that. They don't want you to look at their genes and tell them where they came from. So we're not doing that. But we can look at allergies. We can look at food allergies. Humans are said to be a product of culture, gene evolution, as they have both evolved biological predispositions to depend on cultural information, and this cultural information enhances their fitness as it continues to evolve. So one of the things we do know is that there are a lot of Asians with a lactose intolerance. Okay. They're lactose intolerant. So the Japanese are lactose intolerant. The Chinese are lactose intolerant. The people that live in Siberia are lactose intolerant. And guess what? There's a lot of American Indians that are lactose intolerant. So can we say that they came from the same place? Well, you better not, because people get angry with you when you do. But here we have a very similar allergy to dairy food. So where did dairy come from? Well, it came from cows. So where do cows come from? Well, cows came from the Middle East. Spread up into Europe, so Europeans don't have a lactose intolerance. It spread throughout the North Africa. They don't have a lactose intolerance. But the farther south you go, actually, there are a lot of Africans that aren't lactose intolerant. However, there are African Americans who are. This is bizarre, because over in Africa, they're not lactose intolerant, and they came to the Americas and they are. It's kind of odd. It all depends on what kind of food you ate. Wherever you were. Let's talk about malaria. Malaria is a lot of fun. Well, we'll not talk about it yet. What does it look like when somebody's lactose intolerant? They vomit and they have diarrhea, which is always fun. My two favorite things, kind of like the flu. Vomiting and diarrhea. A common domain in which we see evidence for this selection is cultural differences in dietary practices, such as milk consumption. Different cultures vary in what they regularly eat, and long-term persistent changes in dietary practices have been accompanied by genetic evolution that maximizes the effectiveness of the nutrition that people derive from their diets. Okay, so the people that came over into the Americas, of course there's no milk. Where in the hell are you going to get milk? Well, you can get mother's milk, and that's fine. But when do you stop breastfeeding?
You use goats. Or not goats.
What are we catching here and domesticating?
Oh,
Where did you get sheep? Where did you get goats?
elsewhere.
The Europeans. Bastards, when they came over here, they brought all these things that you guys couldn't eat. Of course you couldn't eat it. Your systems weren't used to it. You couldn't eat pork. Well, you did eat pork. Beef. Beef was so fatty. My goodness gracious. So you guys had evolved eating deer, eating buffalo, eating fish, all these really rich foods as far as nutrition is concerned. But not eating fatty beef. Cows just walk around. Buffaloes, they run. It's really lean meat. Deer, they run. Venison is very lean meat. It's good meat. It's good stuff. You ate a lot of fowl, turkeys, for example, prairie chickens. You ate all these things. It was good meat. It was good food, but not dairy. And you didn't eat grains. There's hardly any grains here. The only grains you ate was corn, which is kind of interesting because some Europeans can't tolerate corn. Passes right through their system. I know. Humans vary in the amount of starch that they eat. In general, people in agricultural societies consume more starch than those in most foraging societies. What we're talking about grains. That's where you get your starches. So corn has a lot of starch in it. Rice has a lot of starch in it.
Potatoes.
Wheat has a lot of starch in it.
Potatoes do too.
Potatoes have they're pure starch. So where did potatoes come from?
Irish, right?
Sorry?
Irish?
Yeah.
No, not those from.
Came from the Incas. Came from Peru. Came from South America. That's where potatoes came from. Corn came from everywhere in the Americas. Everybody ate corn. Way to go. And you raised whole societies on corn. And meat, of course. Good meat and those grains. Not so much potatoes. Potatoes didn't really move out of South America until the Europeans took it out of South America. But if you go to Peru, you can find hundreds of different varieties of potatoes. Now, you guys think that russets are all there is, but the reality is, my God. I was up in the Andes, and we went to a Quichua village. And they made a stew, and it had like 15 different types of potatoes in it. And they were all different colors. It was really fascinating. Orange and purple and blue and white and oh, it was just fabulous. And the flavor, each potato had a different flavor. It was really good. It was fascinating. Anyway, but of course we don't do that kind of stuff because we eat mashed potatoes. When we mash our potatoes, damn it, we mash white potatoes or yellow potatoes. Anyway. The people from cultures in which a lot of starch was traditionally been consumed are more likely to have a genetic mutation that increases the amount of amylase protein in their saliva, which helps to digest the starch. So they have a lot of amylase. Okay. You guys don't have a clue what amylase is, but it's just an enzyme that breaks down starches. So one of the things we did when I was in the laboratory is if you had a ulcer, or if we thought you had ulcers, we would measure your amylase level to see how much amylase you had, because potentially you had too much and you weren't eating enough starch for it to break down, so it was eating a hole in your stomach, and that was why you had ulcers.
I have a question on genes. So can you be semi-lactose intolerant, or is that not?
Sure.
Right? Okay.
Yeah. Sure. In West Africa, populations of Kwa-speaking farmers started to grow yam crops, which required them to clear the forest. Before that, they were foragers, and they decided they would become farmers. And if they became farmers, they could feed more people. And if they fed more people, they would have more people to be in their army. There you go. One inadvertent side effect of cultural practice was that it increased the amount of standing water after a rain, creating a better habitat for malaria-carrying mosquitoes. So we've got this forest, and they decide they're going to grow yams there instead. So what they do, they clear the forest, and they plant fields of yams. Now all of a sudden, when it rains, this is a rainforest, by the way, so when it rains, we get a lot of mosquitoes because there's a lot of standing water. And the mosquitoes mutate. And when they mutate, they start developing malaria. And if you know anything about malaria, there's like 5 different types of malaria. It's really kind of strange. And they all come from different parts of Africa. But one of the things that I had to learn when I was in the military was how to detect malaria. Now you guys shouldn't care about it. Well, no, you shouldn't care about it. You don't have any water. Ain't no water here. So you don't have any mosquitoes. So you don't care about malaria. But I was in the military, and at the time we were in Vietnam. And Vietnam there is malaria in Vietnam. So one of the things we had to detect as medics in the United States military was malaria, because our soldiers would go places where there was malaria. It's one of the things that we ran into in World War II. As they landed on the islands, these tropical islands, they ran into malaria. And of course, we had to treat them for malaria. People in Southeast Asia, not just Vietnam, but Laos and Cambodia and Thailand, these individuals would come down with malaria if they didn't take their quinine, which keeps them from getting malaria. Malaria then spread in these regions and led to the evolution of a particular genetic variant for hemoglobin, which is associated with sickle cell anemia, which has the benefit of making one more resistant to developing malaria. All right, this is really kind of exciting. We've got this whole population that are coming down with malaria. So their genes mutate and their hemoglobin changes. And their hemoglobin changes so that instead of being circular, it's suddenly, under stress, it becomes S-shaped. S-shaped, sickle-shaped. Malaria will not infect somebody with who has sickle cell anemia. Of course, if you've got sickle cell anemia, you die before the age of 20. Whoops. However, if you have the sickle cell trait, malaria will also not infect you. Are you excited yet? So a mommy and a daddy who each have the sickle cell trait make 4 babies. One of the babies doesn't have anything, and it dies from malaria. One of the babies has sickle cell anemia, and they die from the sickle cell anemia. But 2 of the babies have the sickle cell trait, and they don't have anemia, and they also don't get malaria. So half of the population is going to survive because of this genetic mutation. So that's why we see so many people of African descent with sickle cell anemia. Well, we don't see them with sickle cell anemia. What we see is the sickle cell trait. Very rarely do we see people that actually just happen to have sex with somebody else with the sickle cell trait. Doesn't happen that often, but we do see sickle cell anemia, and it's painful to watch. The S-shaped hemoglobin can't pass through the capillaries,
So,
so they get stuck.
So sickle cell is sexually transmitted?
It's genetically transmitted. Yeah. So if you have sex with somebody with sickle cell anemia, you're not going to catch sickle cell anemia.
But if you create a baby with them?
If you make a baby with them, yeah. Potentially they will have the sickle cell trait. You're not African. So that genetic structure isn't in your genes. Are you excited yet? So you mate with somebody with the sickle cell trait. So one of your children will have the sickle cell trait. You'll have 3 children without it and 1 child with it. And they'll get it from their mother. Because you don't have it. I'm sorry, you're the wrong race. Nice try. Unless you have African ancestry. Or possibly Italian ancestry. There are some Italians with the trait. Yeah. Kind of strange. Malaria. It has to do with malaria. Isn't this exciting? I know. So sometimes these things can express themselves. Now, you wouldn't need the sickle cell trait in Chicago because Chicago doesn't have any malaria. So potentially, if you were African American and you lived in Chicago for a long enough period of time, this gene would stop expressing itself because you don't need it. The only people that are surviving in this environment are the people with the sickle cell trait. The people with the anemia are dying, and the people without the trait are dying because they die of malaria. So these are the only people that are surviving. But it's a mutation that allowed people to do what they did. Of course, it also got into the cattle, and it's a little bit different than what we're talking about. Researchers around the world have attempted to identify different genetic variables that might lead to social sensitivity. 5-HTTLPR, A118G, and MAOA, these are all genes, are alleles that have been found in Asian samples but not in European samples. Could they have something to do with social sensitivity? It's really kind of interesting. If you're around somebody from China, somebody that lived in Shanghai, somebody that lives in one of those overly crowded cities, or somebody that lives in Tokyo, or any place in Japan, it is so god-awfully crowded there. Could there be a genetic aspect to their personality that makes them able to survive in a crowded environment? Whereas Europeans, they have never lived in they don't really live in crowded environments. So could there be something about the Japanese and the Chinese, something genetic, that makes them able to survive in those kinds of environments? Whereas we find it the most horrible thing in the whole wide world. A genetic variant that is associated with increased emotional support seeking in times of distress for European Americans is associated with decreased emotional support seeking among Koreans. So whereas when something happens to an American, to a European, we will seek social support, but the Koreans, they have the opposite reaction. So the question is there something genetic about it? It gets worse than that. It gets really bizarre. A variant that is associated with increased attention to foreground objects among European Americans shows the opposite effect among Koreans. Foreground effect. So when we focus on the foreground, they have the opposite effect. Isn't that bizarre? It gets worse. A variant that leads to better responses to antidepressants among Caucasians leads to worse responses among Koreans and Japanese. So when we use the antidepressant, it works on us. And when they use the antidepressant, it doesn't work on them. How about that? And it has to do with the genes that are expressed in them. So because we're used to wide open spaces and not being around a lot of people, they have a gene that makes them able to be around that many people. I don't know how well you like being pushed into a subway car, but if you're in Japan, that's exactly what happens. And the odd thing is that you know that they're going to do it. You know that you're going to be slammed up against the guy in front of you. You know that it's going to happen, and it still pisses you off. It pisses me off. Okay. So it would be fascinating for all of us to take a road trip to Japan, go get into the subway in Tokyo, and see how we react to all this pushing and shoving and people in your face. Now remember, they don't have pheromones like we do. Well, like I do. You guys may not have pheromones. They don't have pheromones. They don't have body odor like the Europeans do. So potentially, I don't know. I don't know what would happen. That's really kind of curious. I told you the story of the Japanese stewardesses. They were all pressed up against me, and I thought I was having a lap dance. Of course, as far as they were concerned, it was nothing. No big deal. They're used to being pressed up against people, and it didn't even faze them. But of course, to me, it was like, hey, you're way too close to me. It's like Al Franken grabbing somebody's butt. I don't know. It gets bizarre. A variant associated with decreased emotion suppression among the European Americans predicted increased emotional expression among Koreans. So what makes us suppress our emotions will make them express their emotions. Is this getting weird? They live in a different society, so their emotional structure is different than ours is. The opposite in some ways, because they're used to the crowding, and we're not. Studies that included a sample of Korean Americans who are genetically more similar to Koreans, but culturally more similar to European Americans, showed a pattern of results that were more similar to those of European Americans, demonstrating that cultural experiences can actually shape how genes are expressed in the body. So because if we looked at their genetic structure, it's very similar to the Koreans. But they have the same personalities as the European Americans rather than the Korean Americans. So it has to do with what genes are expressed. Despite the fact that they have that variant, it's not being expressed. Why? Because they're not in an environment that requires that. So, and I've told you this, Jeff he thinks he wants to go to Japan. And I keep telling him, if you go to Japan, there's going to be a culture shock because you're used to wide open spaces. You're used to people not coming up and getting in your face. Okay, and that's going to happen in Japan. They're not going to yell at you. They're just going to be right there. You're going to be breathing their fish breath. My God, I know, it's pretty bad. Squid breath. Dried squid.
Yeah.
You're going to be standing around, they're going to be chomping on some tentacle. And they do. It's, I can't eat fish. Dutchman average 6'1". Isn't that amazing? What a basketball team. 3 inches taller than the average American man, who stands about 5'10". In 1865, American men averaged 5'8", which was 3 inches taller than the average Dutch man at the time. So something has happened in Holland and in the United States that we have grown, but look, I mean, my goodness, they were 5'5", and now they're 6'1". That's the average height. In less than, in 150 years. They have grown that much. In the late 19th century, the average Americans were among the tallest in the world, reflecting their relative advantage in income. Their gross national product per capita was third highest in the world. At that time, American men were 1 inch taller than the Brits. They were the same heights as the Australians. They were 2 inches taller than Norwegians, 3 inches taller than the French, 4 inches taller than Italians, and more than 7 inches taller than the Japanese. Does this have to do with diet? Well, we ate a lot of dairy products. Americans ate a lot of dairy products. We ate a lot of meat. Australians ate a lot of meat, a lot of beef, a lot of red meat. Norwegians eat a lot of fish. If you eat fish, you're not going to grow very good. Who else do we have? We have the French, who don't eat a lot of meat. When they eat meat, they eat small portions. Who else? Italians. Italians, they eat a lot of pasta, right? Not a lot of meat. There's not a lot of meat to eat down there. It's expensive to grow meat because it's a crowded environment. United States, we have all the wide open spaces. We can grow all the beef we want. We can get a steak, 16-ounce steak. It's not very expensive. Just chop that thing up and devour it. Japan, what do they eat? They eat squid. They eat seaweed. They eat all kinds of seafood. And we were 7 inches taller than they were. South Korean children are about 5 inches taller than their North Korean counterparts. Why? Because of the food. Japanese immigrants to California in the 1950s were about 5 inches taller than their compatriots in Japan. Dairy consumption, in particular, has been linked to that height because they were eating American food. They weren't eating Japanese food. Japanese don't drink milk. They don't have enough space to grow cows, to raise cows. If they raise a cow, it's called Kobe beef, and it's like $100 an ounce. It's ridiculous. Do you think I'm kidding? They feed these things beer. They massage them. I know. They're trying to massage out the fat. It's really kind of bizarre. Well, so how do we raise our beef? Do we feed them beer? Do we feed our cows beer? Hell no. We just let them range out there. And then I run over them, try to hit them with my little car, driving to galloping. Almost hit a horse the other day, running across the road. Japanese and Korean adults report sleeping about an hour less per day than French adults do. Moreover, these cultural differences are not just evident among adults. A systematic study of infants and toddlers in 17 countries around the world found that the Japanese infants sleep about 1.5 hours less than North American infants. So this has something to do with their growth rate. Are you excited yet? I know, me too. So let's go to sleep. Infants from Asian countries were found to sleep much less than infants from Western countries. Dutch infants were found to sleep about 1.3 hours more than American infants, and maybe that's why they're so damn tall. People in countries at the extreme of the sleep spectrum, Japan and the Netherlands, have a pronounced difference in the amount that they sleep. The Japanese sleep, remember, these guys are workaholics. In Japan, there is no such word as workaholic because they all are workaholics. So they sleep on the subway, as bizarre as that is. I have more pictures of Japanese sleeping on subways. There's one. Japanese, European Canadians, and Asian Canadians were provided biometric measurements to measure their sleep. Japanese participants slept about 1.2 hours less than the two Canadian samples. So it doesn't have to do with, it has to do with the genes that are expressed. So even though they were Asian Canadians, because they lived in Canada, where we have different they have different habits, we're not Canadian, the Canadians slept a lot more than the Japanese did. Asian Canadians slept similarly to European Canadians, showing that it is cultural. It's a cultural imperative. And in Japan, of course, they don't sleep nearly as much as we do. Japanese participants indicated that their ideal amount of sleep was about an hour less than that reported by the Canadians. The Canadians described themselves as feeling more tired during the day, even though they were sleeping more than the Japanese. They were still more tired. The Japanese don't drink caffeine like we do, like people in the Americas do. Coke. Oh, they do drink Coke. They don't take shots of espresso or whatever, or lattes or whatever. Coffee is not real popular over there. Until recently, socioeconomic status was invisible to health researchers. We never looked at it, we never thought about it. We just said this group of people do this and that group of people do that. Researchers in 1984 of English civil servants were divided into 4 class categories. It's fairly easy to divide the English into categories. They're very class conscious in England. So it was relatively easy to take these civil servants and divide them up into socioeconomic segments. The researchers found that compared with top administrators, members of the executive class were 60% more likely to die over a 10-year period. The clerical staff was 120% more likely to die, and the unskilled laborers were 170% more likely to die. That's tragic if you think about it. Oh my God, I'm an unskilled laborer, so I'm going to die at 55 instead of 102 like these guys, or like these guys are. Isn't that bizarre? Despite the fact that these were very large differences, they have been replicated in many industrialized countries around the world. It is actually larger than smokers and non-smokers. So if you want to live long, then you need to get the best job you possibly can and make as much money as you possibly can. Then you're going to live for an extended length of time. That's just the way it works. Smoking is one thing, but working in the right job is the best way to stay alive. The same thing was observed in Denmark. The same thing was observed in Norway. The same thing was observed in Finland. The same thing was observed in France. The same thing was observed in Japan. The same thing was observed in New Zealand. In the United States, almost every increase in income reduces mortality rates, and these differences emerge even among those incomes at the highest levels. So if you make $1 billion, well, we've got Donald Trump, he's the oldest man we've ever elected president of the United States. And according to him, he's a billionaire. I'm not sure if he's a billionaire, but he says he is, and obviously he's got lots and lots of money. So even these individuals, Bill Gates potentially will live into his 90s or 100s because he's so wealthy. He's going to live longer than somebody with $10 million. He's going to live longer than somebody with $1 million, even though he can do exactly the same, or they can do exactly the same thing that he does. Potentially. They've got all the money that they need. So the more money you have, the longer you're going to live. So if you look at the age expectancy of people in Blaine County, Montana, where Fort Belknap is, the white farmers will live to be 88. That's their average age, 88. Guess what it is for American Indians? 88. Guess what it is for American Indians?
75.
Wouldn't that be nice?
60.
Wouldn't that be nice? It's 60.
Oh.
It's 60. That's why Michelle's down here. If she was up in Blaine County, she wouldn't live as long. The average income on the reservation in Montana is $8,800 a year. $8,800. For the white farmers, it's a lot more. These guys make a lot more money. And they live a lot longer than the natives up there.
Not all the farmers are white.
That's true.
My friend, the Kill Eagles, they have a lot of cows and
I know the Kill Eagles.
white Hayes, Washington.
I played ball with one of the Kill Eagles. Excuse me.
They go to native ranchers.
Yeah, they are. But they're also native, so they're part of the 60 instead of part of the 88. I'm just talking about all the white people. I was a white person up there too, and I owned a 20-acre farm, but we didn't farm it. So was I a white farmer? Well, yeah, I owned a white farm, but I sold it to a native. I sold my farm to a native. So Bill Bell bought my place. White people, oh no, it doesn't have anything to do with white people and natives. It has to do with the amount of money you make. So the less money you make, the sooner you're going to die. It's the way it works. So I just got a raise, and that takes, means I'm going to live longer. Just got a raise. I'm teaching 34 hours. I get it's like $18,000 bonus at the end of the year, which is going to raise the number of years I live. Just like $18,000 bonus. I'm teaching a huge overload. It's horrible. Death rates, if it doesn't kill me, I'll live longer. Okay. Death rates rise as incomes fall, and as you can see, that's exactly what we see there. This is men and women. Women live longer than men, of course, in most cases. So as you can see, from 1992, from 1992 to 2010, as you can see the death rate. As incomes rise, the death rate lowers. The Fulani, the Mosi, and the Remabi, I think, all live in northeast Burkina Faso. This is Burkina Faso right here. If you don't know anything about Africa, there's Burkina Faso. They're actually in revolution right now, so all bets are off with these guys. The region is endemic with malaria, which is a major cause of death in the area. The Mosi and the Remabi have been living in this region for thousands of years and have developed much genetic resistance to malaria over time. In other words, they have the sickle cell trait. The Fulani moved to this region in the early 19th century as part of the Islamic invasion of sub-Saharan Africa. The Fulani have not developed much genetic resistance to malaria because they haven't been there long enough. The Fulani are the dominant ethnic group in the area because they conquered the area. When the Fulani first arrived, they conquered, enslaved, and decultured the other ethnic groups in the area, including the Mosi and the Remabi. The higher status that they have as conquerors appears to provide them with enough health benefits to more than make up for their genetic vulnerability to malaria. So despite the fact that they have no natural immunity to the malaria, like the Mosi and the Remabi, they still live as long as the Mosi and the Remabi, mainly because of the fact that they have a lot of money, or they own everything, actually. That is confusing. Your health may be seriously compromised if you don't have enough money to pay for adequate health care. And of course, one of the things, it pissed people. The ACA really upset a lot of people. And they were screaming that it needed to be repealed. And they're still screaming that it needed to be repealed, despite the fact that there were 18 million people more in the United States that were getting health care. How were we paying for it? The ACA. Does anybody remember? We were taxing the rich more. What a horrible thing to do. How can you take money away from those poor, wealthy, did I say poor? Those unfortunate wealthy people. In the British civil servant study, all of the workers had the same access to state-provided health care, yet there were still pronounced differences. They have universal health care in England. Everybody gets the same health care. It's the same way up in Canada. They have universal health care. So it shouldn't make any difference. Everybody should live the same length of time. They have the same access to health care. So everybody should live the same length of time. But wealthy people still live longer in England and in Canada. People lower in socioeconomic status are more likely to have jobs that place them in hazardous situations, such as having to deal with poisonous toxins or that make them vulnerable to workplace accidents. My family is from England. Of course, we were in England 300 or 400 years ago, but we were miners. That's why we're not very tall, and we're kind of broad, because we were miners. We looked like dwarves because we were crawling down into the holes and we were mining coal. That's what we did. And we moved to the United States, and of course we didn't really change genetically that much. We kept marrying each other, evidently, because all my relatives look about the same, as strange as that is. Anyway, so as somebody of low socioeconomic status, the probability of getting crushed in a mine collapse is very real. There are toxins down there that people are breathing the air, and they're swallowing the water in the area. That's not one of my relatives, by the way. People in the lower socioeconomic status groups are more likely to smoke, to eat a poor diet because they can't afford a good diet, and they are less likely to exercise. Chronically stressed people are more likely to engage in health-compromising behaviors such as smoking and drinking in order to cope with the difficulties in their lives, and stress directly weakens the immune system's ability to fight off infections and manage other threats. So stress, of course, the stress of being poor is one of the things that's killing these individuals. People who feel that they do not have much control over their jobs tend to have a higher risk of heart disease. Low levels of control are more generally associated with poor physical functioning and an increased likelihood of illness. I told you guys I had a heart attack in 2010. I also think I told you that the reason I had a heart attack was because I got fired. And the reason this was weird. So they asked me if I teach summer school, and I did. And I'm busting my tail teaching summer school. And after I was done teaching summer school, after they got everything they needed out of me, they fired my ass. They got rid of me. I had no control over whether I had that job or not. They just fired me. And then I had a heart attack because I had no control over what happened. None whatsoever. And it was the lack of control, that feeling that I had no control. That's what gave me the heart attack. That's why I had the heart attack. But as I told you before, there was no damage done. Wow. Despite the fact that they were hoping I'd die, I don't know what they were hoping for. One study by Lockman and Weaver in 1998 found that although lower socioeconomic status people have worse health outcomes, those with lower socioeconomic status who felt that they had much control in their lives had levels of health and well-being that were comparable with those in higher income groups. This is something that we keep finding out over and over and over again. The more control you feel like you have, the less stress that you're going to feel. The individuals coming out of Vietnam, the ones that suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, were the ones that were the lower-ranking individuals. They were the draftees. They weren't the lifers. They weren't the sergeants. They weren't the officers. They didn't suffer from PTSD nearly at the level as these individuals who were drafted into the military, served 2 years in combat. Well, they didn't actually serve 2 years in combat. They served 1 year in training and 1 year in combat. These were the individuals coming back from Vietnam who suffered because they were the individuals that had no control over what happened. My brother I have a brother that suffers from PTSD. He had a commander that he was trying to tell this guy that they can't go down the road. If you go down the road, we're going to get ambushed. My brother was a Spec 5, so he really had no status. He was a lifer. At that time, he had enlisted for 4 years, so he had that status. But the officer wouldn't listen to him. And guess what happened next?
They all lived happily ever after.
Wouldn't that be nice?
They got ambushed.
They did. They got ambushed. They got ambushed, but my brother wasn't with them because he refused to go. And he cut around behind them. He cut through the underbrush. And he got to the ambush just before they were ambushed. And so he attacked the North Vietnamese army from behind. Okay. All right. So he saved dozens of lives. Potentially he saved dozens of lives. So what happened to my brother?
Got yelled at for not following orders.
Exactly. Instead of getting a medal for saving everybody's ass, including the lieutenant, yeah, he got in trouble. So they gave him they reprimanded him for not following orders, despite the fact he saved everybody's life. Now that can be very stressful, as you can imagine. But he saved all those lives. Did the lieutenant know what he was doing? No, no, he was in the back of the column. So he just kind of drifted off into the underbrush. But he was right, and he was lucky because they could have been on the other side. They were on the other side. But he attacked the people from the one side, and as soon as he attacked them, the ambush was kind of broke down. And,
Easier to manage.
yeah, exactly. People knew that they were under attack, so they took cover. So there were only a couple people that were killed instead of dozens of people that were killed. But he didn't get any credit for it, even though he was right, because he didn't follow orders, which is more important than anything in the whole life. Stress and feelings of lack of control tend to be more pronounced among those who occupy a subordinate position and are subject to the demands of those who are able to make decisions for them. And of course, this is part of the problem of working for an organization. Theoretically, they just hired our boss. Sarah used to be our boss, and then she quit last summer. So we haven't had a boss all year, all semester. But theoretically, they just hired somebody to be our boss. Now the question is, how much control will these people have? Or will they exert? Will they tell us what we have to do? Will they make us do things? If they leave us alone, we'll probably be okay. The stress level won't be very high. But if this is a micromanaging individual, then potentially it's going to increase the amount of stress that we feel. We're all going to be pissed. This is not just true of humans. Research with various primates has revealed that those individuals who are subordinate in a hierarchy experience greater stress hormone levels when the society is ruled by intimidation. And of course, that happens a lot in these kinds of organizations. Bureaucracy. Bureaucracies are a form of intimidation. I have this information and you don't, and you have to give it to me. Give it to me right now. And that's, the way things work sometimes. Intimidation. The high stress hormones are especially true when subordinate primates are unable to as easily avoid dominant individuals and when they have low availability of social support. Okay, so one of the things that's going to be happening in the next half a year, in the next semester, is that potentially we have a new boss. But we have somebody that's going out to Tuba City, and they're not going to be in direct contact with whoever the boss is, probably. So they're going to feel far less stress than those of us who are here at Saley, because we're going to come in direct contact with the individual that is our boss. So whoever's going to Tuba City is the lucky one, because they can do whatever the hell they want to do. They can leave whenever they want, nobody knows. They can they can do whatever they want. And of course, we're under the microscope the entire time, and we're going to be watched. So as long as they don't harass us, then we'll probably be okay. As long as we can avoid their dominance, we'll be okay. Our stress hormones will not be raised. Does all this make sense? Okay. So if I have a heart attack, you guys know what, well, you're not going to know. You're going to be gone. You don't care. You don't care if I die. Thanks, John. The societal features that result in the greatest degree of stress among subordinates in various primate populations are remarkably similar in the situation in which many low socioeconomic status people find themselves in modernized industrialized societies. Okay, so individuals, they get bossed around by everybody and their cousin. That's a lot of stress. That's just a ton of stress. And as we have discovered, it's about the same as those lower tiered individuals in a primate society. So it's really kind of unfortunate. Okay, so if you're a poor person in the United States and you're on welfare, how much control do you have over the money coming in? Change administration, all bets are off. And that's exactly what's happened with the Trump administration. Who's he trying to make happy? Who is Trump trying to make happy?
Republicans?
His Republican base. And his Republican base seems to be saying these kinds of things. So as far as he's concerned, he doesn't care about these guys. The poor people. The people on welfare. He doesn't care. Because they're not going to vote for him anyway. As a matter of fact, that's one of the arguments that Republicans have been making for an extended length of time. These people are just free riders. They're just trying to get away with stuff. I'm sorry about the picture. Yes, she's drinking champagne. And she has a short skirt on. And she has really skinny legs. I don't know. Wait a minute, let's read it. Maybe I can figure it out. Feeling poor can matter as much as actually being poor. The experience of relative deprivation of knowing that others are doing better than you might lead to stress and its associated negative health consequences. Okay, so if you went to a wealthy place, a place where there were a lot of wealthy people, if you went to the country club, there's a hierarchy in the country club as well. Somebody runs the place, somebody has more money than everybody else. So you've got a millionaire and you've got a billionaire. The billionaire is not going to suffer very much stress. His kids are going to be brats because they think they can get away with anything. The millionaire's kids, on the other hand, are going to feel poor because in comparison, they are poor. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's the environment that you live in. I guess that's why I had that picture of the lady drinking. I don't know. I don't know. What kind of a picture should I have put up? I don't know. I can't remember what I typed in there. Feeling poor, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, those are relatively wealthy people in a very wealthy situation. I was moving. Do I have time? Yeah, I was moving to Washington, D.C. We went through horse country, and if you guys have no clue what horse country is, but in the East, there are people that have horses, and it costs them. They have farms, and they have to have a barn for their horse. So it costs them tens of thousands of dollars to maintain these horses. You guys have horses, you just open the corral and let them go. And they wander all over and they run in front of my car. But that's okay. So here, having horses doesn't really mean that much. But over there, it means that you're wealthy. So these people will get together and they will dress in really, really nice clothes. And they'll try to outdress everybody else at these horse events. They'll wear hats that cost $10,000. They'll wear outfits that cost $100,000. Their shoes will cost $100,000. As stupid as all this sounds, why are you wasting all your money just to impress other people? Why? This is the reason why. And actually, this is an event from those horse people. They get together and they preen and they pose and they'll walk around and try to show everybody else how important and how rich they are, how wealthy they are. And they buy horses for $50,000. Does anybody have a horse? $50,000?
No, but I have a friend that has those racing horses.
Yeah.
And they're pretty expensive, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They'll have whole stables. Did I say horses? I meant stables. A stable means you've got lots of horses. There's a horse in every stable, okay? It's really weird. They are so irritating. These people are so irritating. So I'm over there, and I went to a store in horse country, and they were having an event. And of course, I'm buying things. You know, I go up to the clerk and give her my money, you know, and these people are just looking at me. Oh my goodness, they're all posing and trying to show me how lowly I am because, you know, I'm not one of them. And I've got Nikes on. No, I don't. I'd never wear Nikes. I had something on, but they certainly weren't worth $100,000. Anyway, of course, I didn't react to them because I don't give a shit who those people are. That's not important to me. You know, I've had horses before, not worth $50,000 or anything. Anyway, okay, let's go ahead and stop right here. I'll pick this up next time. Sorry that I'm not a wealthy person. You have horses, and you have a friend with a stable.
My
Oh,
horses aren't that